Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The engine of my beat-up Chevy sputtered as I pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. Another day at the garage done, and earlier than usual. I wiped the grease from my hands onto my already stained jeans, thinking about surprising Catherine with takeout from that Chinese place she likes. As I climbed the stairs to our second-floor apartment, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. This wasn't the life I'd promised her when we got married. A rundown apartment in a less-than-stellar part of Denver wasn't exactly the American dream. But I was working my ass off at the garage, saving every penny I could. One day, I'd give her everything she deserved. I reached for my keys, but paused when I heard laughter coming from inside. Catherine's melodic giggle, followed by a deeper chuckle I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted as I inserted the key as quietly as possible. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open. The laughter stopped abruptly. I stepped inside, my work boots heavy on the worn carpet. Our tiny living room was empty, but I could hear hushed whispers coming from the bedroom. "Catherine?" I called out, my voice tight. "You home?" Silence. Then, "Brad? You're home early." I crossed the living room in 3 quick strides, my heart pounding. Without hesitation, I threw open the bedroom door. The scene before me burned itself into my brain. Catherine, her blonde hair tousled, clutching a sheet to her chest, and next to her, a man I'd never seen before, scrambling to pull on his pants. "What the fuck is this?" I growled, my fists clenching at my sides. Catherine's eyes went wide. "Brad, I can explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my gaze locked on the stranger. "Who the hell are you?" The man, now standing awkwardly with his shirt half-buttoned, cleared his throat. "I'm Scott. Scott Anderson. Look, man, this isn't..." "Isn't what?" I stepped closer, fury building inside me. "Isn't what it looks like? Because it looks like you're fucking my wife in my goddamn bed." Scott held up his hands. "Now, let's all calm down here. We can talk about this like adults." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Talk? You want to talk?" I grabbed him by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "How's this for talking? Get the fuck out of my house before I throw you out the window." "Bradley, please," Catherine cried, scrambling out of bed with the sheet wrapped around her. "Don't hurt him." I spun to face her, still gripping Scott's shirt. "Don't hurt him? Are you serious right now?" Scott tried to squirm away, but I tightened my grip. "I said get out." I dragged him towards the bedroom door. "Wait, my shoes, my wallet," Scott protested. "I don't give a shit about your stuff," I snarled, hauling him through the living room. I wrenched open the front door and shoved him into the hallway. He stumbled, nearly falling. "If I ever see you near my wife or my home again," I warned, "you'll be leaving in an ambulance." "Got it?" Scott nodded frantically, his face pale. I slammed the door and turned back to Catherine, who stood trembling in the bedroom doorway. "Brad," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I never meant..." "Save it." I cut her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Please, just let me explain. It wasn't supposed to." "To what?" I interrupted. "To happen? To go this far? How long has this been going on, Catherine?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. That was all the answer I needed. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "I've been busting my ass at the garage, working overtime, trying to save up for a better life for us. And this is how you repay me?" "I know," Catherine sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. But I love you, Brad. We can work through this." I laughed bitterly. "Work through this? You think I can just forget walking in on you with another man in our bed?" "It won't happen again, I swear," she pleaded. "Give me another chance. I'll do anything." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I'd married. All I saw was a stranger. "Get out," I said quietly. Catherine's eyes widened. "What?" "I said get out," I repeated, my voice growing louder. "Pack your shit and leave. Go live with your new boyfriend for all I care." "Brad, please," she begged, reaching for me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Don't," I warned. "Just don't." I can't even look at you right now. Catherine's shoulders slumped in defeat. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, I replied coldly. You've got an hour to pack your things and get out. After that, anything left behind goes in the dumpster. I turned and walked out of the apartment, ignoring Catherine's sobs behind me. I needed air, needed to clear my head. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. I'd given Catherine everything I had. My love, my trust, my dreams for the future. And she'd thrown it all away for what? Some fling with a guy who could probably buy and sell our entire apartment building without blinking. As I paced the parking lot, my mind raced. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face? Every late night at work, every girl's night out, had they all been excuses to meet up with Scott? The thought made me sick to my stomach. I'd been such a fool, so focused on working hard to build a better life that I'd completely missed what was happening right under my nose. Well, no more. Catherine had made her choice, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. As for me, I was done being the nice guy, the trusting husband. It was time to look out for myself. I checked my watch. Catherine's hour was almost up. Taking a deep breath, I headed back to the apartment, ready to start the next chapter of my life alone. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed and a pounding headache. For a blissful moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. But the silence in the apartment and the lingering scent of Catherine's perfume on her pillow brought reality crashing back. I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen, desperate for coffee. As I waited for the pot to brew, I noticed Catherine's house key on the counter, along with a hastily scribbled note. I crumpled it up without reading it and tossed it in the trash. Whatever excuses or apologies she had to offer, I wasn't interested. The phone rang, startling me. I let it go to voicemail, not in the mood to talk to anyone. Catherine's voice filled the apartment. Brad, please pick up. We need to talk about this. I know I made a huge mistake, but I yanked the phone cord out of the wall, cutting her off mid-sentence. Silence fell once again. As I sipped my coffee, I tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't stay in this apartment, surrounded by memories of our life together. But I'd be damned if I was the one who had to move out. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, holding a casserole dish. Bradley, dear, she said, her brow furrowed with concern. I heard raised voices last night. Is everything all right? I forced a smile. Everything's fine, Mrs. Ramirez. Just a little disagreement. She peered around me into the empty apartment. Where's Catherine? I haven't seen her leave for work yet. She's gone, I said flatly. We're separating. Mrs. Ramirez's eyes widened. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. What happened? I hesitated, not wanting to air my dirty laundry. But Mrs. Ramirez had always been kind to us, and I knew she'd hear the gossip eventually. She cheated on me, I admitted. I caught her with another man last night. Mrs. Ramirez gasped, nearly dropping the casserole. That hussy, after everything you've done for her? I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. It is what it is. Life goes on, right? She reached out and patted my arm. You're better off without her, dear. A good man like you deserves someone who appreciates him. Thanks, Mrs. Ramirez, I said, managing a small smile. I appreciate that. She pressed the casserole into my hands. Here, take this. You need to keep your strength up. And if you need anything at all, you just let me know. I thanked her again and closed the door, oddly touched by her kindness. It was a stark contrast to the betrayal I'd experienced last night. As I got ready for work, I steeled myself for the inevitable questions and pitying looks. News traveled fast in our tight-knit community of mechanics and body shop workers. Sure enough, the moment I walked into the garage, I could feel the shift in atmosphere. Conversations died down, and everyone seemed to be watching me out of the corner of their eye. My boss, Frank, approached me cautiously. Brad, can I see you in my office for a minute? I followed him, bracing myself for an uncomfortable conversation. Frank closed the door behind us and cleared his throat. Look, son, I heard about what happened with Catherine. If you need some time off. I'm fine, I interrupted. I'd rather work, keep my mind off things. Frank studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, if you're sure. But if you change your mind, just let me know. We've got your back here. I mumbled my thanks and headed out to start my first job of the day. As I popped the hood on a beat-up Ford, my coworker, Jake, sidled up to me. Hey, man, he said awkwardly. Sorry about Catherine. That's rough. I grunted in response, focusing on the engine in front of me. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Listen, a bunch of us are going to O'Malley's after work. Why don't you join us? First round's on me. I paused, considering the offer. The thought of going back to an empty apartment was depressing. Maybe a night out with the guys would help take my mind off things. Yeah, all right, I agreed. Thanks, Jake. He clapped me on the shoulder. No problem, man. We've all been there. Well, maybe not exactly there, but you know what I mean. As Jake walked away, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anger. They hadn't been there. They hadn't had their entire world shattered in an instant. They hadn't been betrayed by the one person they trusted most. I attacked the engine with renewed vigor, channeling my frustration into my work. By the end of the day, I'd completed more jobs than usual, earning an approving nod from Frank. At O'Malley's, the guys did their best to keep the conversation light, avoiding any mention of Catherine. But as the beers flowed, I found myself growing more and more agitated. I just don't get it, I said suddenly, interrupting a story about Jake's latest Tinder disaster. We had plans, you know, a future, and she just threw it all away for what? Some rich asshole who probably sees her as nothing more than a piece of ass. The table fell silent. Jake cleared his throat. Maybe it's time to call it a night, Brad. Let me drive you home. I shook my head stubbornly. No, I'm fine. I need to figure out what to do next. What do you mean? Another coworker, Mike, asked cautiously. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I can't just let them get away with this. They need to pay for what they did. The guys exchanged worried glances. Jake spoke up. Brad, man, I know you're hurting, but don't do anything stupid, all right? It's not worth ruining your life over. I laughed bitterly. My life's already ruined. What's left to lose? As I stumbled home that night, my mind raced with possibilities. Jake was right, I couldn't do anything stupid. But that didn't mean I had to roll over and take this lying down. No, I decided. Catherine and her new boyfriend needed to face consequences for their actions, and I was going to make damn sure they did. The next few days passed in a blur of work and sleepless nights. I threw myself into my job at the garage, taking on extra hours and the toughest repairs. Anything to keep my mind occupied and my hands busy. But when the workday ended and I returned to my empty apartment, the anger and betrayal came rushing back. I couldn't shake the image of Catherine in our bed with that smug bastard, Scott. It was during one of these restless nights that an idea began to form. I remembered an old friend from high school, Anthony, who now ran a pawn shop on the seedier side of town. We'd lost touch over the years, but I knew he still had connections to some less than reputable characters. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. Instead of heading to the garage, I drove across town to Anthony's shop. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. Anthony looked up from behind the counter, his eyes widening in recognition. Brad Richardson, he exclaimed. Holy shit, man. It's been what, 10 years? I forced a smile. Hey, Anthony. Yeah, it's been a while. He came around the counter to shake my hand. What brings you to my humble establishment? Looking to buy or sell? Neither, I admitted. I actually came to ask a favor. Anthony's expression grew serious. What kind of favor are we talking about here? I glanced around the empty shop. Can we talk somewhere more private? He nodded, leading me to a small office in the back. Once the door was closed, he turned to me expectantly. All right, Brad. What's going on? I took a deep breath. My wife cheated on me. With some rich asshole named Scott Anderson. Anthony winced. Shit, man. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, well, sorry doesn't cut it, I said, my voice hardening. I want to make them pay. Both of them. Anthony leaned back against his desk, studying me carefully. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? That's where you come in, I explained. I need information. Dirt on this Scott guy. Anything I can use against him? Brad, Anthony said slowly, You're talking about some potentially illegal shit here. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I met his gaze steadily. I'm sure. Look, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal yourself. I just need connections. People who can get me the information I need. Anthony sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. You always were a stubborn son of a bitch. All right, I might know a few people who can help, but it'll cost you. How much? He named a figure that made me wince, but I nodded. I can get it. Half now, half when I get the information. Anthony held out his hand. Deal. But Brad, be careful, all right? This kind of thing can spiral out of control real quick. I shook his hand firmly. I know what I'm doing. Thanks, Anthony. I owe you one. As I left the pawn shop, I felt a surge of energy. For the first time since that awful night, I had a purpose, a plan. Over the next few weeks, I worked even harder at the garage, picking up every extra shift I could. My coworkers noticed the change in me, but I brushed off their concerns. Just trying to keep busy, I'd say with a shrug. They'd nod sympathetically, assuming I was throwing myself into work to avoid thinking about Catherine. If only they knew. Finally, Anthony called me with the information I'd been waiting for. I met him at a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of stale beer and cigarettes, but it was perfect for our needs, quiet and discreet. Anthony was already at the bar when I walked in. He nodded towards a booth in the back corner. I slid in across from him, my heart racing with anticipation. You got what I need? I asked, keeping my voice low. Anthony pulled out a thick manila envelope. It's all in here, man. But I gotta warn you again, this is some heavy shit. You sure you want to go through with this? I reached for the envelope, but Anthony held it back. I'm sure, I growled. Now give it to me. He sighed and handed it over. Your funeral, Brad. But don't say I didn't warn you. I opened the envelope and started leafing through the documents inside. My eyes widened as I took in the information. Holy shit, I muttered. This guy's into way more than I thought. Anthony leaned forward. Yeah, turns out your wife's new boyfriend isn't just rich, he's dirty rich. Money laundering, real estate fraud, you name it. He's got his fingers in all kinds of illegal pies. I looked up at Anthony. This is perfect. With this, I can destroy him. What exactly are you planning, Brad? Anthony asked, a note of concern in his voice. I grinned, but there was no humor in it. I'm going to hit him where it hurts most, his wallet and his reputation. By the time I'm done, he'll wish he'd never laid eyes on Catherine. Anthony shook his head. Just be careful, man. Guys like Scott Anderson, they don't go down easy. And they've got friends in high places. I'm counting on it, I replied. The higher they are, the harder they fall. I finished my drink and stood up. Thanks for this, Anthony. I owe you one. He waved me off. Just don't do anything stupid, all right? I don't want to see your face on the evening news. I nodded and left the bar, my mind already racing with plans. Scott Anderson thought he could take my wife and get away with it. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Over the next few weeks, I pored over the information Anthony had given me. I cross-referenced bank statements, property records, and business filings. Slowly but surely, a picture emerged of Scott's illegal empire. I knew I had to be smart about this. One wrong move and Scott could turn the tables on me. So I bided my time, gathering more evidence and planning my next steps carefully. Finally, I felt ready to make my move. I used a burner phone to call in an anonymous tip to the SEC about Scott's fraudulent real estate deals. Then I leaked some incriminating documents to a few key players in the Denver business community. It didn't take long for the rumors to start swirling. I watched from afar as Scott's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Business partners distanced themselves, deals fell through, and the whispers of impropriety grew louder by the day. One evening, as I was leaving work, I overheard two of my coworkers gossiping. Did you hear about that big shot developer, Scott Anderson? One of them said. Word is, he's under investigation for fraud. The other whistled low. No kidding? Man, the mighty sure do fall fast in this town. I smiled to myself as I got into my truck. Scott was feeling the heat, and this was just the beginning. Soon, he'd know exactly what it felt like to have everything he cared about ripped away. As I drove home, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My blood ran cold as I read the message. I know what you're doing. Meet me tomorrow night at the old warehouse on 5th. Come alone, or things will get ugly. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. Had Scott figured out I was behind his troubles? Or was this someone else entirely? Either way, I knew I couldn't ignore the message. Whatever was waiting for me at that warehouse, I had to face it head on. After all, I'd come too far to back down now. I pulled into my driveway, my resolve hardening. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this would all come to a head. And I'd be damned if I let Scott or anyone else get the better of me again. The next day dragged on forever. I went through the motions at work, my mind fixated on the meeting that night. As soon as my shift ended, I raced home to prepare. I paced my living room, debating whether to bring a weapon. In the end, I settled for a heavy wrench tucked into my belt. Better safe than sorry. The old warehouse loomed before me, a hulking shadow against the night sky. I parked a block away and approached on foot, every sense on high alert. As I neared the building, a figure stepped out of the shadows. My hand instinctively went to the wrench, but I froze when I recognized the silhouette. "Catherine?" I called out, disbelief coloring my voice. She stepped into the dim light of a nearby street lamp. "Hello, Bradley. What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded. "Where's Scott?" Catherine held up her hands. "Scott doesn't know I'm here. I'm the one who texted you." I snorted. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe that?" "It's the truth," she insisted. "I needed to talk to you, and I knew you wouldn't agree to meet me otherwise." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "So talk." Catherine took a deep breath. "I know what you've been doing, Brad. The anonymous tips, the leaked documents, it's all you, isn't it?" I didn't confirm or deny it. "What's it to you? Afraid your meal ticket's about to get cut off?" Her face fell. "I deserve that. But Brad, you have to stop this. You don't know what you're getting into." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I think I do. Your boyfriend's not as clean as he pretends to be, is he?" "It's not that simple," Catherine pleaded. "Scott's involved with some dangerous people. If you keep pushing, they might come after you." I stepped closer, my voice low and intense. "Let them come. I'm not afraid of Scott or his cronies." Catherine reached out, but I jerked away from her touch. "Brad, please. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But this isn't the answer." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I snarled. "You threw away 10 years of marriage for what? A guy who buys you pretty things with dirty money?" Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes. "It wasn't like that. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you." I laughed harshly. "Save it. If you loved me, you wouldn't have spread your legs for the first rich guy who came along." Catherine flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I deserve that. But Brad, I'm begging you. Walk away from this before it's too late." I shook my head. "It's already too late. I'm seeing this through to the end." "And then what?" Catherine demanded. "You destroy Scott's life, and then what? Will that make you happy?" I met her gaze steadily. "Maybe not, but it'll be a damn good start." Catherine's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I can see there's no talking you out of this. Just be careful, okay? I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." I turned to leave, then paused. "Why did you really come here tonight, Catherine? To warn me off, or to ease your own conscience?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Both, I suppose. And I guess I wanted to see you one last time, to remember the man I fell in love with." I looked back at her, my expression hard. "That man's gone. You and Scott killed him the night I walked in on you two." Without another word, I walked away, leaving Catherine standing alone in the shadows of the warehouse. As I drove home, my mind raced. Catherine's warning about dangerous people gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I'd come too far to back down now. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing with notifications. I grabbed it, my heart pounding as I scrolled through the news alerts. Breaking: Denver developer Scott Anderson under investigation for fraud. Anderson Enterprises stock plummets amid scandal. Sources claim Anderson linked to money laundering scheme. A grim smile spread across my face. The dominoes were falling, just as I'd planned. But I knew this was only the beginning. I got dressed and headed to work, trying to act normal. But inside, I was buzzing with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. As I pulled into the garage parking lot, I noticed a sleek black car I didn't recognize. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his eyes scanning the lot until they landed on me. "Bradley Richardson?" he called out as I got out of my truck. I tensed, my hand instinctively going to the wrench in my belt. "Who's asking?" The man approached, his movements smooth and controlled. "My name is James. I represent certain interested parties in Mr. Anderson's business dealings." I snorted. "You mean his illegal business dealings?" James's expression didn't change. "I'm here to deliver a message, Mr. Richardson. My employers would greatly appreciate it if you ceased your current course of action." "Or what?" I challenged, standing my ground. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Or things could become very unpleasant for you. This is your only warning." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back to his car. As he drove away, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The threat only fueled my determination. Scott and his cronies thought they could intimidate me? They had no idea who they were dealing with. I marched into the garage, my mind already formulating the next phase of my plan. Scott Anderson's empire was crumbling, and I was going to make damn sure there was nothing left standing when the dust settled. A week after James's visit, I received another text from an unknown number. This time, it was from Scott himself. "We need to talk. Meet me at the abandoned factory on Route 7 tonight at 10. Come alone." I stared at the message, weighing my options. It was obviously a trap, but part of me wanted to face Scott head-on. In the end, my desire for confrontation won out. I arrived at the factory early, scoping out the area. The place was a wreck, all rusted metal and broken windows. Perfect for an ambush. At exactly 10 p.m., a sleek sports car pulled up. Scott got out, looking far less polished than the last time I'd seen him. His designer suit was rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Bradley," he called out, his voice echoing in the empty lot. "I'm glad you came." I stepped out of the shadows, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Scott?" He held up his hands. "I want to make a deal. This war between us, it needs to end." I laughed harshly. "A deal? You've got some nerve." Scott's face hardened. "Look, I know you're behind all this. The tips to the SEC, the leaked documents, you're systematically destroying everything I've built. You reap what you sow," I shot back. "You shouldn't have messed with my life. It was just supposed to be a fling." Scott exploded. "I never meant for it to go this far. But you're taking this too far." I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. "Too far? You fucked my wife in my bed. You destroyed my marriage. And now you're getting a taste of your own medicine." Scott ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "What do you want from me? Money? I'll pay you whatever you want. Just call off the dogs." I shook my head. "I don't want your dirty money. I want you to suffer like I suffered." "You're insane," Scott muttered. Then he straightened up, his expression shifting. "Fine, if that's how you want to play it." He snapped his fingers, and two burly men emerged from behind a pile of scrap metal. My hand went to the steel pipe I'd brought, hidden under my jacket. "Last chance, Bradley," Scott warned. "Walk away now, or things are going to get ugly." I gripped the pipe tighter. "Bring it on." The two men rushed me. I swung the pipe, catching the first one in the ribs with a satisfying crack. He went down hard, gasping for air. The second guy was on me before I could recover. He landed a solid punch to my jaw, sending me staggering back. I tasted blood but managed to stay on my feet. "Is this how you solve all your problems, Scott?" I taunted, spitting blood. "Sending goons to do your dirty work?" Scott's face contorted with rage. "You brought this on yourself." I ducked another punch from the second guy and swung my pipe again, catching him in the knee. He howled in pain and dropped. Suddenly, it was just me and Scott. He looked around wildly, realizing his backup was down for the count. "What now, tough guy?" I growled, advancing on him. Scott backed away, his bravado evaporating. "Bradley, wait. We can talk about this." "I'm done talking," I snarled. I swung the pipe, aiming for his smug face. Scott managed to dodge, but just barely. He tripped over a piece of scrap metal and went down hard. I stood over him, pipe raised. All the rage, all the pain of the past months came pouring out. "This is for destroying my life," I growled, bringing the pipe down. Scott threw up his arms to protect his face, but I changed course at the last second, smashing the pipe into his knee instead. He screamed in agony, clutching his shattered kneecap. I dropped the pipe, breathing heavily. Scott lay on the ground, whimpering in pain. "It's over, Scott," I said, my voice cold. "You've lost everything. Your money, your reputation, and now your health. How does it feel?" Scott looked up at me, his face a mask of pain and fear. You're insane," he gasped. I crouched down next to him. "No, I'm just a man with nothing left to lose. Remember that the next time you think about screwing over someone's life." I stood up and pulled out my phone. Without taking my eyes off Scott, I dialed a number. "Catherine? It's Brad. Your boyfriend needs you. He's at the old factory on Route 7. You might want to bring an ambulance." I hung up and looked down at Scott one last time. "Goodbye, Scott. I hope it was worth it." As I walked away, leaving Scott groaning on the ground, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I waited in the shadows, watching as Catherine's car pulled up to the factory. She got out, looking around frantically. "Scott," she called out. "Brad?" I stepped into view. "Over here." Catherine's eyes widened as she took in my bruised face and bloodied knuckles. "Oh my God, Brad. What happened?" I jerked my thumb towards the factory. "Your boyfriend's inside. He's going to need medical attention." She started towards the building, then hesitated. "Did you?" "He'll live," I said flatly, "but he might walk with a limp from now on." Catherine's face paled. "Brad, what have you done?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What have I done? I've given you both exactly what you deserve." She took a step towards me, her hand outstretched. "Brad, please. This has to stop. We can still fix this." I backed away from her touch. "Fix what, Catherine? My shattered trust? Our ruined marriage? Scott's criminal empire?" Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes. "I know I hurt you. We both did. But this isn't you, Brad. You're not a violent person." "I wasn't," I corrected her. "But then my wife decided to fuck a criminal in our bed. Funny how that changes a man." Catherine flinched at my words. "I'm so sorry, Brad. For everything. If I could take it all back." "But you can't," I interrupted. "What's done is done. Now you both have to live with the consequences." A groan from inside the factory caught our attention. Catherine looked torn between staying to talk and rushing to Scott's aid. "Go," I said, nodding towards the building. "Your boyfriend needs you, just like you needed him when you decided to throw away our marriage." Catherine hesitated, torn between rushing to Scott's aid and trying to make amends with me. "Brad, please. Can't we talk about this?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say. You made your choice, Catherine. Now you have to live with it." She took a step towards me, her eyes pleading. "I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do to make it right." "You want to make it right?" I interrupted, my voice hard. "Then live with the consequences of your actions. Watch as Scott's empire crumbles around you. Feel the fear and uncertainty that comes with knowing your comfortable life is about to disappear." Catherine's face paled. "What do you mean?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Scott's not just injured, Catherine. He's finished. The authorities are closing in on his illegal activities. It's only a matter of time before he's arrested." "You're lying," she whispered, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Am I?" I challenged. "Why don't you ask him yourself? I'm sure he'd love to explain how he's been laundering money and defrauding investors." Another groan from inside the factory caught our attention. Catherine looked conflicted, her gaze darting between me and the building. "I have to go to him," she said finally. I nodded. "Of course you do. But before you go, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to know that everything you thought you had is slipping away." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen, Brad. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. What you did was a choice, Catherine, and now you get to live with it. She opened her mouth to respond, but another pained cry from Scott cut her off. Without another word, she turned and ran towards the factory. I watched her go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and emptiness. My revenge was nearly complete, but the hollow ache in my chest remained. As I walked back to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "It's done," I said when the line connected. "Scott's down, and Catherine's with him. You might want to send someone to pick him up before he tries to run." The voice on the other end was gruff. "Good work. We'll take it from here." I hung up and got into my car. As I drove away from the factory, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. In the distance, I could see flashing lights approaching. The authorities were closing in, just as I'd planned. I allowed myself a small smile. Scott's downfall was complete, and Catherine was about to learn just how deep his deception ran. They'd both betrayed me, and now they were paying the price. But as I merged onto the highway, heading back to my empty apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was hollow. I'd gotten my revenge, but at what cost? The man I used to be felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone harder, colder. I shook off the thought. There was no going back now. I'd made my choices, just as they had made theirs. All that was left was to face the future, whatever it might hold. The weeks following the confrontation at the factory passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work at the garage, taking on extra shifts and the toughest jobs. Anything to keep my mind occupied and my hands busy. One morning, as I was elbow-deep in an engine rebuild, my boss Frank approached. "Brad, got a minute?" he asked, his tone unusually serious. I wiped my hands on a rag and followed him to his office. "What's up, Frank?" He gestured for me to sit. "I've been noticing some changes in you lately. You're working harder than ever, but there's something different about you." I shrugged, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Just focused on the job, that's all." Frank leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "Is that all it is? Because I've been hearing some rumors about what went down with your ex-wife and her new boyfriend." My jaw clenched. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that involve the FBI and fraud charges," Frank replied. "Look, Brad, I'm not here to judge, but I need to know if there's anything that could blow back on the garage." I met his gaze steadily. "I haven't done anything illegal, Frank. Everything that's happening to Scott and Catherine, they brought on themselves." Frank studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I believe you. But Brad, I gotta ask, was it worth it?" The question caught me off guard. Was what worth it? "All of this," Frank gestured vaguely. "The revenge, the plotting. Did it make you feel better?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but the words stuck in my throat. After a moment, I sighed. "I don't know, Frank. I really don't know." Frank's expression softened. "Look, son, I've been where you are. When my first wife left me, I was a mess. Wanted to burn the world down. But eventually, I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me." I looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "What are you saying, Frank?" He leaned back in his chair. "I'm saying that maybe it's time to let go. Move on. Start building something for yourself instead of tearing others down." His words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. I stood up, needing to escape the sudden tightness in my chest. "Is that all, Frank? I've got that engine rebuild to finish." Frank nodded, a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "Yeah, that's all. Just think about what I said, all right?" I mumbled an agreement and left his office, my mind whirling. As I got back to work on the engine, Frank's words kept echoing in my head. Was it worth it? Had my quest for revenge really accomplished anything? Later that evening, as I was closing up the garage, Jake, one of my coworkers, approached me. "Hey, Brad," he said, fidgeting nervously. "Some of us are heading to O'Malley's for a drink. Wanted to see if you'd like to join us?" My first instinct was to refuse, as I had been doing for months. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was Frank's words, or maybe I was just tired of being alone. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself. "Yeah, I think I will." Jake's face lit up. "Great. We've missed having you around, man." As we walked to the bar, Jake chatted about work and his latest Tinder disasters. It felt normal. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Catherine or Scott or revenge. At O'Malley's, I found myself actually enjoying the company of my coworkers. We talked, laughed, and for a few hours, I felt like my old self again. As the night wound down, Mike, another mechanic, clapped me on the shoulder. "It's good to have you back, Brad. We were starting to worry about you, man." I felt a pang of guilt. Yeah, I know I haven't been the easiest person to be around lately. I appreciate you guys sticking by me. Jake raised his beer. That's what friends are for, right? Through thick and thin. As we clinked bottles, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still a future for me beyond my quest for revenge. It wouldn't be easy, and the pain of betrayal still lingered, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. A few days after the night at O'Malley's, I was working on a particularly stubborn transmission when Jake burst into the garage, his eyes wide with excitement. "Brad," he called out, waving his phone, "you gotta see this." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over. "What's going on?" Jake thrust his phone at me. On the screen was a news article, the headline bold and unmistakable: Denver developer Scott Anderson arrested on multiple fraud charges. My heart raced as I skimmed the article. It detailed how the FBI had conducted a raid on Scott's offices, uncovering evidence of money laundering, real estate fraud, and a host of other financial crimes. "Holy shit," I muttered, handing the phone back to Jake. He looked at me, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "Brad, man, this wouldn't have anything to do with you, would it?" I met his gaze steadily. "What makes you say that?" Jake shuffled uncomfortably. "Well, it's just, we all know what went down with your ex-wife and this Scott guy. And then all this starts happening." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Jake, I appreciate your concern, but trust me, it's better if you don't know the details." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay. I get it. Just, you're okay, right? You're not in any trouble?" I managed a small smile. "I'm fine, Jake, but thanks for asking." As Jake walked away, I leaned against the car I'd been working on, my mind reeling. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? Scott brought to justice, his crimes exposed for all to see. So why didn't I feel more satisfied? Later that evening, as I was heading to my truck, I saw a familiar figure waiting for me in the parking lot. "Catherine." I tensed as I approached her. "What are you doing here?" She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "I needed to talk to you, Brad. About Scott, about everything." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices, Catherine." She flinched at my tone. "I know, and I'm paying for them now. But Brad, I need to know, did you have anything to do with Scott's arrest?" I studied her face, searching for any sign of the woman I'd once loved. All I saw was a stranger, worn down by stress and fear. "Would it matter if I did?" I asked finally. Catherine's shoulders slumped. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to hear it from you, to understand why." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why? You really need to ask that? You destroyed our marriage, Catherine. You and Scott took everything from me. What did you expect me to do? Just roll over and take it?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you, Brad. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I snapped. Then, taking a deep breath, I forced myself to calm down. "Look, Catherine, what's done is done. Scott's going to jail, and you, well, you'll have to figure out your own path now." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know. I guess I wanted to say goodbye, and to tell you that I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I looked at her for a long moment, feeling a mix of anger, pity, and a lingering ache of what might have been. "Goodbye, Catherine. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As she walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The chapter of my life that included Catherine and Scott was finally closing. It was time to focus on what came next. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The garage was busier than ever, and Frank had started talking about making me a partner in the business. One Saturday morning, as I was finishing up an oil change, Frank called me into his office. "Brad, take a seat," he said. gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've got a proposition for you." I sat down, curious. "What kind of proposition?" Frank leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've been thinking about expanding the business, opening a second location on the other side of town, and I want you to run it." I blinked, stunned. "Me?" "Frank, I don't know what to say." He grinned. "Say yes, you idiot. You're the best mechanic I've got, and you've got a head for business. This is your chance to build something of your own." The offer was tempting, more so than I would have expected. "Can I think about it?" Frank nodded. "Of course. Take the weekend. Talk it over with, well, whoever you need to talk it over with. Let me know on Monday." As I left Frank's office, my mind was whirling with possibilities. This was an opportunity one never would have dreamed of a year ago. That evening, I found myself at O'Malley's, nursing a beer and mulling over Frank's offer. Jake slid into the seat across from me, a knowing look on his face. "So, you gonna take Frank up on his offer?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. News travels fast. Jake shrugged. "Small garage, big ears. So, what are you thinking?" I took a swig of my beer. "I'm thinking it's a hell of an opportunity, but also a big risk." "Life's all about risks, man," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "Look at everything you've been through this past year. If you can handle all that, running a garage should be a piece of cake." I couldn't help but laugh. "You might have a point there." Jake's expression grew serious. "For real though, Brad, you've changed a lot since all that stuff with Catherine and Scott went down. And I don't just mean the brooding, revenge-driven part." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're stronger now," Jake explained. "More confident. You know what you want, and you're not afraid to go after it. That's the kind of guy who can make a success of his own business." His words hit home, making me see myself in a new light. Maybe he was right. Maybe all the pain and anger of the past year had forged me into someone stronger, someone capable of building a future on my own terms. "You know what?" I said, raising my bottle. "I think I'm gonna do it." Jake grinned and clinked his bottle against mine. "That's what I'm talking about. To new beginnings, man." As we drank, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The betrayal, the revenge, the turmoil of the past year. It all felt like it belonged to someone else. The man I was now, he was ready to move forward, to build rather than destroy. Monday morning, I marched into Frank's office with a newfound determination. "I'll do it," I said without preamble. "I want to run the new garage." Frank's face split into a wide grin. "That's what I like to hear. All right, partner, let's talk details." As we hammered out the plans for the new location, I felt a surge of excitement. This was more than just a business opportunity. It was a chance to redefine myself, to become the man I wanted to be. Later that day, as I was leaving work, I paused in the parking lot, looking back at the garage. So much had changed in the past year. I'd lost a wife, gained and lost a taste for revenge, and now I was on the verge of becoming a business owner. The man who had walked in on his wife's betrayal felt like a stranger now. That man had been consumed by anger and a thirst for vengeance. The man I was now, he was focused on the future, on building something lasting. As I got into my truck, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was older, wiser, marked by the trials I'd been through. But there was something else there too, a determination and a strength that hadn't been there before. I started the engine, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past was behind me now, and the future, for the first time in a long time, looked bright. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.